I am Amy Silberkleit. I have a number of lithographs in the show, Glimpses of Our Landscape, with the painter Natalie Wargin. I've always been making things. My husband and I started a rod puppet troupe in high school that lasted several years. We performed in libraries, schools, festivals, and fairs, and that led to a business making rod puppets to sell, and then fabric collages using the fabric collection I had gathered from making the elaborate costumes worn by the puppets. I made intricate fabric landscapes based on places where I hiked. I decided I wanted to go back to drawing my observations rather than using fabric collage, and at the time I lived near the Botanical Gardens in the Bronx, which offered an intensive certificate program in natural science, art, and illustration. The program focused on drawing and painting plants and animals from specimens. Through this program, I was able to improve my drawing skills. I had studied printmaking in college and was particularly interested in stone lithography, where images are made on the surface of lithographic limestone with either pen, brush, or crayons. I preferred crayons, which I sharpened to a fine point to get maximum detail. After the certificate program, I wanted to get back to drawing my observations on the stone. I went to the Art Students League, which has an excellent printmaking facility, and one of the professors there was downsizing his studio. I was able to buy his press, his collection of stones, and other equipment to set up my own lithography studio, and that was about 10 years ago. The lithography stones are reusable. Some of them were quarried in Bavaria 200 years ago or more. Their original use was for commercial printmaking, and once that technology became obsolete, artists began to use the stones for fine art. Once I finished printing my editions from the stone, I removed the image by graining off a thin layer of limestone using coarse to fine carborundum until the surface of the stone is the texture I want for drawing. The limestone is very porous and uniform, so that the grease in the lithography crayon is absorbed into the pores of the stone. After the image is complete, oil-based ink is rolled onto the surface of the stone with a leather roller and printed onto paper. As long as the surface of the stone is dampened by water, ink will only adhere to the drawn area, since water and grease repel one another. I usually make an edition of 15 to 20 prints before graining off the image and starting again. Before I start drawing the image on the stone with crayon, I use chalk to sketch my drawing onto the stone because chalk will not print. I plan my compositions carefully beforehand since you can't erase the crayon. I use my own photographs and drawings as reference material. The stone is an amazing surface to draw on. I build up layers of tone with my crayon, which gets absorbed by the limestone. It's a very slow process which can take several weeks to complete. All of my works in this show are based on what I see or find in the area where I live. It's important to me to draw what I see on my hikes. Things like what I notice about changing weather or light at different times of day. In that way, I think that the other artists in the show and I are similar. I will often find things on my hikes that I think are worth drawing on the stone. In the process of drawing, I learn a lot about structure, form, and pattern. I found a dead woodpecker in the woods. I was able to bring it into my studio, mount it on board, draw it on the stone, and print it. That's how I made the print woodpecker. I really fell in love with the tail with its specialized pointy feathers that help the woodpecker anchor itself on the trunk of a tree. I used this same technique in the print Kestrel and in the print Fallen. In fall, and I arranged the house sparrow wings and abandoned nests and ferns in a still life and then drew that onto the stone. In this case, I printed the edition on transparent paper. On this particular print, I fused the paper to a monotype I had made of branches. So it's not part of an edition, it's a singular print. The prints from last winter are often based on my observations about the weather, particularly warmer temperatures and the lack of consistent snowfall and the increase in ice. In the lithograph Windblown, I wanted to convey the feeling of a warm, wet wind in January with rain in the forecast. I used Japanese paper for the edition and fused a gray piece of the same paper to make the color in the sky. The same technique was used in Winter Brook. In the lithograph Clearing, I drew a familiar trail that is covered in a new trackless snowfall, making the landscape beautiful. This print is also on Japanese paper. I'd fused it to 100% rag paper, which has some toning on it with watercolor. The sky was heavy and full of moisture, indicating rain. Icy Trail shows a trail that I hike often in the winter, which was covered in thick ice instead of snow. The beaver pond in the lithograph of the same name is a place we return to often in the summer. When you enter the creek where the beaver dam is built, you are upstream of a large waterfall, so the water is rushing downstream with a strong current as you walk upstream to the beaver pond. Once you reach the dam, which is made of knotweed, the water in the pond beyond is completely still and deep. We have seen many beavers here. The lithograph Still Water is referring to the same pond. Downstream is a view of a creek at the bottom of the hill we live on. It's in a deep valley, and the water level changes dramatically every time it rains hard, and the rainwater rushes down the slope. The print Wind and Water shows a trail on the edge of a cliff above a creek on a snowless, windy winter day. The scene in Ridgepath Winter is of a ridge trail beyond my house that I hike frequently. Although there's only a thin covering of ice and snow on the trail, the next mountain is covered in white, and that's where I am heading. The lithograph Heavy Sky is also of a place I hike frequently. It's a bushwhack on an old logging trail that leads to a lookout above a quarry where Devonian-era fossils were found. It overlooks a valley that was filled with water millions of years ago. I'm very conscious of the history in this spot, so I gave it a Heavy Sky. The next two lithographs are of places I have been or passed by on a bicycle. The lithograph Crop is of a rail trail, which is now a right-of-way through farmers' fields. The closely planted corn seemed to be waving. The trail is so flat that the one tree in the distance looked ominous. Early Morning is of a scene I see a lot on one of our bike routes. The road is below the fields and shaded by trees. The field is in warm, early morning sunlight in the fall. I printed the lithograph on Japanese paper and fused it to rag paper that had been toned with yellow watercolor. In all of these prints, I focus on what I see in the landscape around me. I'm always looking for something beautiful or meaningful to draw.
Growing up in Chicago, I was part of a creative family. My mother was a knockoff designer before she got married. My father was a engineering draftsman, but he was also a watercolorist and a photographer. We always had art projects going on all the time. Kitchen table was a favorite spot. Clay, paint by numbers, linoleum for printing, you name it, we were doing it. And by the time I got to high school, I'd heard, you're going to be an artist when you grow up, so many times that I started to believe it. But then, also by the time I got to high school, I realized I had to figure out how to make a living. And that's when I learned about graphic design. So I went to school, went to the University of Illinois, studied graphic design, and became a graphic designer. And for 20 years or so, more than that actually, I had my own little studio in Chicago, and that worked out very nicely for me. And that's where it all started. I messed around with paper mache. I didn't do any painting in Chicago. It was a lot of digital work, Illustrator, Photoshop, but mostly it was graphic design, and I loved that. How did my move to New York influence what I'm doing? Well, I don't even know how to make this statement big enough. I bought the house that we have here in Cottick Hill, which is in Rosendale, in the winter. I bought it on Martin Luther King Day, 16 years ago. It was just a house. It was brand new. It was just a house, just sitting on dirt. And there was a lawn seeded, but nothing had come in. There was no landscaping. And there was just nothing going on. I mean, it was lots of trees. I know we had a lot of wooded area on this piece of property, but I had no idea what I was in store for. And then came spring. We have behind this house a swamp. It's gorgeous. I cannot tell you how beautiful this is. It was a complete surprise to me. It's a big swamp. Everything, every creature that you can imagine, every creature that lives in this area hangs out at that swamp at one point or another. And you can't help but notice this. It was shocking. It's green, the most beautiful green you could imagine. All this water, all these animals, birds, wood ducks, geese. It's just beavers. It's amazing. A kid from Chicago. What did I see? I mean, I saw dogs, I saw cats. There were a lot of rabbits in Chicago, surprisingly, but none of this. And so, yeah, this move started to change the way I looked at things, and it started to get me excited about different things. So I went from virtually no wildlife. I did see a coyote once in Chicago. That was a lovely surprise. But other than that, just domestic animals and pets. But here I am walking out of my house in the morning, and there on the other side of my wall is a coyote just looking at me. Or I come out of the car after grocery shopping, I'm getting my bags out of the car, and I look up, and there, across from the swamp from me, is a mother bear with 2 cubs just watching me. This is gobsmacking. I couldn't believe it. And so inspiration, I suppose, I got really excited. Somewhere around 2013, I started doing some little watercolors, little botanical kind of things. I painted a picture of the enormous bear that was standing next to my garage. Just things that struck me, things that surprised me, things that I stopped to look at. And if that's inspiration, I suppose that's it. The other thing that started to happen as I started putting these things, a bear or a plant or something, into a context, started to create a landscape, as it were, around whatever caught my eye. I started to see that I was actually telling a story, that there was something going on here, that things were connected. And as the pieces got more complicated, because, gee, can I cram another plant in this corner? Or how about a little turtle over here? I didn't want people to miss these things because they were small and somewhat obscured. So I would start to tell a story. I would tell a story of deer running past that I just happened to see. I was just in the right place at the right time, and lucky me, and put myself or whatever dog I had at the time in the picture, and by describing what is in the piece and telling the story that I'm forming in my head as I'm working on these things, I hope to lead people around the surface of the painting, and I hope they don't miss things, because I don't tuck a bunny under a leaf for no reason. I want you to see it. And because there are bunnies under the leaves and there are all these wonderful things going on, and I think they deserve a look. The idea behind this particular exhibit was to come up with a subject, in this case landscape, that was common, but to find two very different ways of conveying the idea of landscape. And when I saw Amy's work, her black and white, strong black and white prints compared to all of my color, I thought this could be a good combination. And I'm really pleased to say that I think it worked out very well. I think that Amy's work offsets mine and my work offsets Amy's. And so we bring our strengths and we support one another. And I think people see that. At the opening, I heard from practically everybody that they thought the combination of the work was very good. And so, yeah, I'm sort of pleased that the different approaches seem to complement one another. I think if there's anything, maybe two things, I hope people take from this exhibit. One is that there's inspiration everywhere. If you're an artist or if you're inclined to be creative in any way, there is just joy and inspiration everywhere in this Hudson Valley landscape. I've mentioned before that I think it helps to have a dog. It has certainly helped me, because you're out on a walk, the dog stops to sniff, and you got to give them time to sniff. I mean, it's what they do. And you stop, just pause and look around. And I've seen the most wonderful tiny things that I would have walked right past, thanks to Tilly or Maggie or, whatever dog is with me. And the other thing that I would like people to take away from this exhibit is that every picture truly does tell a story. And if you stop to look at a painting or a print and kind of place yourself in the context, see yourself as part of it, look at the details and think about what you yourself see, and think about the things you have in common with the piece that you're looking at. And it's just, everything is connected, and everything can be connected in your mind and in your heart. And I think that it's a wonderful thing to tell a story.